Welcome everybody, and welcome in particular to Tom Roden, Sally Doughty, and Pete Shenton. I'll briefly introduce myself, then I'm going to ask our three guests to introduce themselves. So I'm Jonathan Burrows, and I started saying I identify as a choreographer, and there's a certain sense of doubt in that. And I'm also an associate professor at the Centre for Dance Research. Would you three like to introduce yourselves first, and then I'll kind of introduce the subject, then we'll move on to the chat. So just somehow, if you could say a little bit, just to give a bit of context, you know, where your starting points are for all of these things that you do. I mean, not a full CV, that's not necessary, but you know, what matters in your background. But I think most importantly, what are you concerned with now? What's the research or practice you're busy with? What questions are you working with at the moment? Tom, you're on in my ordering of this Teams meeting. You come first on the left. Would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. I'm Tom Roden. I'm one half of New Art Club. We've been making shows together since around about 97, 98. Started off making, as Pete often says, rather beautiful contemporary dance shows, which gradually over the years became more comedic. And as we got older and older, and the dancing dropped away more and more, we drifted into doing comedy. At some point, we changed from selling our work into the dance sector and started going into more of the world of comedy. So we ended up playing comedy festivals around the world and doing gigs more like Soho Theatre than The Place, for example. So that's the kind of trajectory of New Art Club. And alongside that, I also work as a workshop leader and choreographer and director and do all kinds of stuff around that, as I'm sure you can imagine, as we all have to do in this industry. And then currently I'm doing a lot of teaching, leading workshops, facilitating stand-up comedy boot camps. So I'm doing that with young people, with adults, with men's mental health groups, and in the corporate sector. So yeah, that's me. Pete, over to you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm the other half of New Art Club, so I don't have to say anything about that. I'm a senior lecturer at Montfort University, and where I teach on the acting and the dancing program. I should have said that in the other way around, because I'm more teaching on the dance program, but I teach on the acting program as well. And I am also writer and director for Unanima Theatre Company, who are a company whose members all have learning disabilities and or autism, based in Mansfield. And I'm currently doing a PhD around mine and Tom's work, focusing on being and play.
Sally.
I'm not involved in New Art Club, although I have danced with both Pete and Tom at various moments. So maybe I'm an honorary member, I don't know. I like to think I am, but you may not. Yeah, hi, I'm Sally Doughty. I've been making and performing work internationally and nationally since about the early 90s. I'm really fortunate to have worked with a lot of amazing people who are in this room today. And a lot of that has very much informed my practice and my thinking about my practice. So I think I'm, well, I don't think I am massively interested in improvisation as a performance mode. And that's been my sort of practice and my research activity probably for about 15 to 20 years now. And as part of that, a key thing that fascinates me is around noticing and how we notice the choices that we're making when we're improvising and why I'm doing what I'm doing when I'm improvising. So I've written about that, I published about that, and that very much informs the practical work that I'm engaged in. I'm interested in documentation of improvisational practices, corporeal archives, memory, how memory works in an improvisational practice, dancing and drawing. So all sorts of things related around that practice, but with improvisation pretty much as the nub of that. Pete and I started dancing together in about 2016. We have a duet called This Is that I'm probably going to talk about quite a lot later on today as we go. And yeah, as Tom and I were talking about earlier on, we worked together many years ago with the Claros Ensemble. So yeah, that's me. Oh no, actually, it's not me. Sorry. I should also say that I also work at Montfort University with Pete, where I'm associate professor in dance and deputy head of school, which is largely a kind of managerial leadership admin job.
Thanks, Sally. Can I just ask you, when every time I mute my mic, it makes a strange blipping noise. Can everybody hear that? But no, okay, so there must be some way that it's suppressed on the meeting. Okay, so the overall subject for this series of conversations that Kerry and I have curated this year is the body and time. It follows on from a pattern in the C-Day invites where it's always the body and another overarching subject. So in the first of the sessions of the body and time, we looked at split-second decision-making before improvising or before moving. In the second session, we looked at what Kerry and I were calling reflective time. So kinds of performance which invite a particular mode of response from the audience, which is reflective, and for the performers themselves. And we were very keen to risk to look at the idea of comedic timing. And I think for me, one of the reasons to invite that is that I don't make I worked for 35 years with the composer Matteo Farjan, and we make performances that people often laugh during, but the performances are by no means comedy. There's a different set of principles set up within the context of contemporary dance, which seems to invite laughter as a response. Something we can perhaps look at as we go along. But I had a very interesting experience once in New York. Boris Sharmatz was doing his Musée de la Danse in a small former school in Brooklyn, and he'd invited the dancer Valda Setterfield to be there all day long. And the idea was you could go up and ask her anything about her work with Merce Cunningham. And I stood listening with a group of people, and she was telling fantastic stories about Merce Cunningham. But when everybody had left, I crept up to her in a kind of slightly fanboy mode. And I said, I just wanted to say that your duets with David Gordon that I saw in the early 1980s were really important to me because they were funny. And she said something which really astonished me. She said, oh, I'll tell David when I get home. He's always felt rather marginalized because the work he made was funny. I thought that was sad in a way, but also I completely understood what she was saying. So it's made me interested in where do people place humor within contemporary dance. And the other reason to invite this is because I once asked Tom and Pete to join me at the Sadler's Wells Summer University many years ago, which I was directing, and I said, can you give us a talk on comedy? And I'm basically earning money now in my own workshops by quoting the things that Tom and Pete said during that completely improvised talk. And even though I was already making performances that people laughed at, some of the reference points you made and the context you both built for what you do and in the relation to humor, the relation of humor to dance, gave me a permission that I think I didn't have before. I'd like to begin with a question, and it's a very open question. Then maybe we'll go from there. I've got lots of questions. You'll probably have questions that triggered by each other and the things that come up. But I think we should start by saying, could each of you just respond a little bit about what the idea of comedic timing in performance might mean to you? And I think more importantly, is that the right term? Or do you think of it in other ways? And that maybe connects to, like, is it something you work with consciously? Is it something more intuitive? If it's intuitive, where does that feeling come from? How do you know if it's comedic or not? How do you know if it's connected to time or not? Sally, do you want to?
I can give it a go, Jonathan. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that kind of introduction to the context for the talk. That's really lovely. Thank you. I don't think I consciously work with a sense of comedic timing. I mean, I'm not a comedian, although people laugh at some things that I do. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. I know there are things in, kind of formal comedic work around, like, you don't do something more than 3 times because, you set something up and then it resolves, and, and there's this notion of the kind of return whereby you return to things that you've set up and you do something with that. I think I do that. I think we definitely do that in This Is Pete. But, I haven't studied any of that at all. I just know some of that stuff, I think, but I don't think that I work consciously with comedic timing. I think it comes very much from sensing that something is building, that maybe something is building over time. I'm going to just stop there, and I'm going to ever so briefly give you a very brief description of the duet that Pete and I do called This Is, because I think I'm going to talk about that, and it might help. It might help you understand what I'm saying. So Pete and I have a duet. We stand side by side, and it is very much about gestures, largely arm and hand based initially, that morph and emerge over time. And we propose these gestures to the audience, and then at some point when the gesture is something to us, we say, this is a rainbow. This is milking a very large cow. This is whatever. And sometimes what we say verbally relates quite clearly to the gesture. Sometimes it's completely not connected at all. But very often I'd say always there is a connection. Even if it's unrelated, there's a connection between the verbal and the physical. So in that duet, Pete, and by all means come in, we're not working to any comedic form of timing, I would say. We are responding to what's in the room, to what the gestures are, to what feels like would be a good moment to make a verbal proposal that potentially is quite funny because it's completely unrelated or it's really related to it. But I would say I'm not working with any conscious sense of formal comedic timing. It's kind of reading the room and reading the space and knowing what's building and knowing what's emerging from that. So again, in terms of my intro just now, I guess it's about noticing where I am at with the thing that is emerging and developing, and perhaps what it needs.
I really like how you described that performance, because I've become more and more fascinated by how imprintable all movement is by whatever you say. Whatever you say will appear to be resonant in some way. And what I like about that is it contradicts the dogmas of the dance theatre moment, which believed that gestures must be very specific in order to hold very specific meanings. And I find more and more that they're completely, can be completely altered and immediately by anything that's said.
Yeah.
Tom, do you have any thoughts about the term comedic timing?
Yeah, I think when I think of timing in relation to New Art Club work, the first thing that crops up is a project we did called Big Bag of Boom, which was a kind of best of New Art Club show. And what we did was take all of our kind of work up to that date, and we made a Edinburgh show, so it had to fit into sort of 55 minutes. So we compressed about, I can't remember, 10 hours of material, 15 hours of material into 55 minutes. And that was a kind of joyful process for us. And it threw up the challenge. First of all, what we were doing was trying to find the funnies, because it was an Edinburgh show, programmed into the comedy bit. And we took all of our work and we just tried to find the funny, and we kind of fairly obviously knew that what we were doing was editing and getting things down to their essence and to their comedy essence. And there was great joy in taking whole sequences that maybe lasted 7-10 minutes in a contemporary dance setting and became things that happened over 15 seconds. And so that's the first thing I think of is brevity. And the old stand-up comedy thing that I talk about in the workshops that I lead is don't drown your jokes in words, which is kind of a common thing, but it's sort of similarly kind of thing. So it's like extracting the comedy by editing. That's what I think of when I think of timing, because I think of the devising process around it rather than the kind of the delivery of it. So it's like the construction of that show, and the episodic nature of it meant that it came at you thick and fast rather than developing over time.
Yeah, that was one of the things I took away from the talk you gave all those years ago at the Sadler's Wells Summer University, was this idea of condensation, but on a massive scale. Like an hour-long piece is going to last 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Like what's in there? I do often share that image with students that I'm working with. Like, what if your job, because I think people see their job as dance creators to expand and develop things. What if it was the opposite? What if actually your job was to squeeze it? And what I find is that when you squeeze it, it produces masses more material.
Yeah.
Because you're not in this trap of time. Pete, have you got any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I concur with that. That's a big thing, and it's something that we discovered in a way when we started to jump into the world of comedy, because we were in that trap of, I mean, I personally was definitely in that trap of thinking, oh, this idea is really good. Maybe I could make it into something that lasts for 12 minutes instead of 40 seconds, rather than going, this is great as it is. And one of the things that Tom and I started to do when we had that discovery was to make space for really small ideas, rather than thinking a small idea, if it can't be expanded into something, it can't exist, it doesn't have any value or something. So that's one of the things. I think just jumping to a different place, I guess there's something about comic timing, which is about rhythm in the moment, that is about, I was working yesterday with one of my students who was introducing the show that I'd made with them. So she had to speak to the audience at the beginning. And part of it is giving the audience enough time to make sense of what you're saying. Like in a really simple, like if you give all of this is new information, if I do not give space for you to hold that information, it will not be funny because you won't understand what I've said to you. And so part of it is something about how much space you give to the audience, and that there is something about that is obvious when you're directing it. But it's easy on the inside to, if the lines are set, to say the lines and you think you're saying it, blah, blah. And then on the other side, there is also a truth to a sort of pace that allows things to be, for like getting like a pace that pushes you towards the thing, something that drives you, can be really valuable. And on the opposite of that idea of compressing, it made me think of one of the things in mine and Tom's work is a joke that Tom once told me on the phone that ended up being a sort of 6-minute bit in one of our shows, and it became a sort of song and dance routine with a sort of marching band and stupid stuff. So it built and built and built, and it's called He Had a Shed. And the joke was like a minimalist joke, but Tom told me on the phone, he said, oh, I've got this joke. He had a shed, he had a shed, he had a shed, he had a shed load of porn under his bed. Okay. And so it was just to turn that idea of the image of a shed into a different image. And I remember finding it really funny. And then we took that and made a whole song and dance routine where we only said he had a shed, because we felt like that thing could, as you said it more, if you did it well and made it fun, the idea of the shed got bigger and bigger in the audience's mind, and you could, and also the desire to get to the end becomes bigger. Like if you keep saying he had a shed, the desire to sort of get on the other side of that becomes bigger. So then when it does, the laugh is bigger because you get a bigger relieving moment. So there's something about that feels there, which is to do with how we manipulate material over time.
Yeah. Are you talking about repetition? Or not necessarily repetition?
Not necessarily repetition. In that case, definitely repetition, but it's something about, maybe you could talk about it, Tom, about the sort of building of that tension or something.
Yeah, so one of the images that I've been using with workshop participants is to talk about inflating balloons and popping balloons. So the setup is inflating a balloon, and the punchline or the punch moment, whether it's a movement or a sound or a word, pops the balloon in a satisfactory way. So you've got to inflate in a good way, and you've got to pop in a good way. And I think the he had a shed thing sets up really well, because I think the balloon is inflating the whole time during the 3-minute dance number. But I think you become not aware that the balloon's being inflated. Something like that. I think what I don't like about stand-up is when you feel you're being, that you can sort of see it being inflated. Yeah, here's the setup, here's the setup, here's the setup, and here's the punch. Okay. And so I think one of the things that we try to do is use a bit of subterfuge and kind of sneakily inflate those balloons. And there's another example of a bit that we do where Pete talks about something that's quite serious over a 15-minute period. And again, I'm sitting on stage. I think we all might talk about this again. This might crop up a bit today, but I sit and I watch and listen to him talk. And for the whole of that 15 minutes, the audience are unaware that there is being a balloon inflated. And then I pop it at the end. And that's a really beautiful one, because the actual delivery of the line that I have it's 10 words or something. We performed it so often that I kind of got bored of performing it, and I delighted in how the punchline worked every night. And I tried to fuck it up sometimes to see if to see if there was a way of delivering the line that didn't work. And that worked every time. The pin for that particular pop was it's so perfectly designed, it didn't matter which way you used it.
Sally, do you inflate balloons and pop them? Is that an image that resonates?
I think not in the same way that Tom and Pete have just described. I think just going back to this is because of the repetition of the gestures that kind of slowly shift and change, that then get punctuated with the kind of verbal, this is a, or this is blah, blah, blah. It's almost like the balloons are very slightly inflated. It's almost like you've just taken a breath in to blow the balloon up and then you've popped it already. So I think there is a kind of sense of anticipation, perhaps, because the gestures repeat. You know, let's just say it's this. You know, there's quite a lot of repetition, and it's almost like, okay, so what is going to happen? How is that going to get resolved? But I think it's resolved much more quickly than Pete and Tom's examples, because it's certainly not a quarter of an hour chunk of gesture before Pete and I speak, but there is a kind of resolution or an offer in response to those gestures or through those gestures. But I think it's a different balloon that we're popping.
But I think it's a really good example. What happens in that, once the audience know we're playing that game, and we know this because people have spoken to us about it, is that people in the audience, of course, start to play that game.
Yeah.
We're offering gestures. We're saying what those gestures are. Once you've started that game, of course, people in the audience are now starting to go, what is this what is this thing? What is it growing into? What is it becoming? And of course, it's extremely unlikely that it's going to be the same thing that's in the audience's head as is in either Sally or my head, because it's very rare that Sally says something that is what I was thinking. Yeah. So in that way, there is this sort of this thing building for the audience, which is then popped by one of us, you know, giving it a meaning or an image, and that, you know, can be delightful and funny. Yeah, so I think there is something connected in that there's that building of tension around what is this thing going to be. And so in that sense, it does really work like a joke, even though, I mean,
it's not
Sal and I are so busy, like mentally busy in that improvisation, because it's extreme in a really fun way. It's like really demanding. It's like extremely demanding. And you have to be, there's no point at which you think, oh, I'm going to say a funny, clever thing.
Yeah.
Because you just there's no space for that in your sort of presence with the thing as it's happening. You're just like, you know, finding something. And then when it lands, you're like, oh, that was satisfying. I found something, you know. Yeah. And if it's funny, it's funny, you know. It's
and very often it's not, for me, I can't speak for you, Pete, but for me, I'm not aiming for a consciously funny thing to say. And I was just thinking back about this is for examples that I might share today. And we did a show at De Montfort a while back, Peter, on the Research Institute launch. And literally the first thing that was said, I think I said it, and I'm just going to shift my camera. And I don't know, let's say I was doing something like, well, Pete and I were doing something like this. And I said, this is holding a very small kitten. Not funny. And everybody laughed. It's like, so why is that, you know, why is that funny? I certainly didn't say it to be funny. I thought it was quite a, don't know, a tender moment. And people laughed. And I was like, flipping heck, I wasn't expecting that. And so for me, there's that thing about, no, I mean, sometimes, Pete, I think we are intending to be funny and to work for a laugh. But not all the time. And it's quite surprising, the audience's responses to that, particularly when I'm not really aiming for a laugh in that moment. It's interesting. And maybe that's what the audience bring to that moment for themselves.
Can I bring up the elephant in the room, which is really I've only suggested this talk because I want to ask this question. Why do audiences at contemporary dance performances laugh at things that aren't funny at all? What is it, something to do with the impression that a balloon is being inflated and then wanting it to pop, something to do with grasping hold of some kind of meaning? Because I see things which are funny and they make me laugh, but I also see performances where everybody, I mean, even in performances where people laugh and you go, but that wasn't funny. I did actually just laugh when you said I'm holding a very small kitten. So
you see, it works, Jonathan. It works.
I'm guilty of the thing that I'm critiquing. But can anybody rescue me from this?
I've got something to say about that. I think it's very contextual. I'll give you. I made a show with my students about, I think it's 10 or maybe even 12 years ago, and it was based on a thing that Tom and I do in one of our shows where you make a noise when you move. It's a rhythmic thing, like a silly rhythmic thing. And we built it up into a sort of routine and then we sang a song over it. But I did this thing. It was quite weedy, experimental thing in a way. It was performed 2 nights. On the first night, there was a big school group in. And as soon as it started, one of them found it funny. As soon as the first thing was like someone goes, "Nyeh," or something like that. And one of those kids found it funny. The other kids started to find it funny. Everybody in the audience laughing their heads off throughout the show. It was like funny, 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 funny. The next night, there was no kids in, completely different context. Lots of people's parents had come to see them in their show. No one laughed once through the whole thing. Exactly same show. Exactly the same show. And so there's something for me about the context, and really hard for and I said to them, look, it will be different. People won't, there'll be different moments. Don't expect the laugh, blah, blah, blah. All of those things that you have to say to people who are not used to being laughed at, of making things that are funny. But even I was astounded by the complete change. So I think it has to be about context. It's about who's in the room. It's about I think often with contemporary dance, there is a sort of a shared knowledge or a shared history. So that people find things funny in the context of a knowledge of dance, of other dance works, and once people find something funny, it gives permission. Yeah. So I'll give you another example. One of mine and Tom's shows, we have a thing that's called One Another. And it actually started out as a commission at the Limbury, and it was like a 20-minute improvisation. It wasn't funny in any way. We squeezed it down to a short little funny thing. And I start by saying, oh, Tom's gone, I'm going to do my solo. Right. And then I'm in some weird unitard or something. And I go, 1. That's all I do. I just move my arm and say the word 1. It's not funny. And then I look at the audience in a serious way. And I'm waiting for someone to crack. Because once I've got someone to crack, it all becomes funny. So I go 1. And then someone cracks, and then I give them a dirty look, like, this is my serious solo. What the fuck are you doing, laughing at my serious solo? And that makes them laugh a little bit more. And then I go 1, 1, 1. And then from then it's funny. But you could easily do that with no laughter whatsoever as a sort of experimental piece of contemporary dance. So there's a sort of there's a sort of, you know, there's a sort of a permission to laugh, and then you can read it in a comedic way. That, I think there's something about that. I'm not wholly on top of that. There's something about that, I think, that is why that happens.
Tom, any thoughts
Yeah.
about the audience that laughs at things which aren't at all funny in contemporary dance?
I have got something to say, but I think I can't help but put myself in one of your shows. I'm watching one of your shows, Jonathan, and I'm wanting to laugh, even though I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to or not. And I'm reminded of the funniest joke that anyone will ever tell you is that a funeral is your best friend whispering a joke to you at a funeral. And I don't want to make the comparison of being at one of your shows as being like being at a funeral.
It's probably been said before.
It seems like I have done. In that there's a reverence and a seriousness, and of course I know there's a playfulness as well, that creates that tension. So that's, I think that, you know, it's startlingly obvious, but that's why we laugh at contemporary dance, and we've all done it.
Do you miss that space of contemporary dance that allows that reverence which builds tension? Because that's not there in the comedy club. In a comedy club, you've got to hit the ground running, and people will heckle immediately.
I think that one of the things that New Art Club has done is to we're making things that are funny, but we're not making out and out comedy shows. There's only Big Bag of Boom that's an out and out comedy show. The rest of the time we're making kind of art shows that are concealed within comedy shows. So we're hiding our art inside a comedy show. And so I think we delight in opening up that kind of reverence within the comedy space. So the times that we do it have been pretty successful. So I think we're like aware that we're trying to open up artful moments and play with time. And we don't play, we did sometimes play sort of rowdy late night, you know, kind of drunken comedy events, but most of the time we're playing to arty comedy crowds who are open to that experience anyway, and wanting a bit of that, because there's many different comedy worlds and many different comedy audiences, in the same way that there are many different dance audiences.
Sally, the piece you're describing that you perform with Pete is improvised.
Yeah.
We just talk a little bit about. When I watch comedians, I always get the sense that they're pretending to improvise, but they've done an awful lot of rehearsal, and there's been an awful lot of memorization of particular sequences of text or physical comedy routines or something. But thinking about how you manipulate the experience of time of the audience in relation to what they remember and what they expect, the balloon inflating, the balloon being popped. What would be the difference between improvised choices or something that was scripted? Is there anything scripted in the piece?
No, nothing at all in terms of what we say or the gestures that we offer. I suppose the only thing which is fixed is that we start standing side by side at the start, and there were some moments where we might move away from each other. So there was some kind of score-based rules, if you like, to kind of hold it and frame it, but there's nothing which is predetermined at any moment except the start, and we end side by side as well. Memory is a really important part of that. Memory for Pete and I memory of previous performances that we've done of this is, because sometimes things filter in from those previous performances and we go, oh, here we are again. So as an example, we tend to, for whatever reason, bring in singing the song Sowing the Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears, because generally we are running our fingers through fields of corn, or we're sowing seeds or something, and that just takes us to, I tend to sing it more than you, Pete, I think. I don't know what that's about. Let's analyze that afterwards. But that kind of comes in several shows, I would say. So there are moments that just reappear. I don't think it's super conscious. It's triggered by something that one of us has said, and we go, ah, I'm going to sing the song. Here I am. So there's something about memory for Pete and I in it. There's also so there's memory from previous performances. There's also memory of the piece that we are doing in that moment, and so we try to bring threads back and tie them together, almost like the return I spoke about earlier, whereby at the end of it, or somewhere where we are gathering these quite separate strands and trying to make a story, trying to make a context that kind of makes sense, although it may not make sense in reality. So there's memory that Pete and I are working with there. But also, you know, we've had people come up to us afterwards and say, oh my gosh, that really made me think about my mum when she said this to me, and da da da. So we know that it's an absolute trigger for memories arising in our audience as well. But there is nothing fixed, nothing set. It really is emerging in that moment, and it reveals itself in that moment, which I think is also maybe what helps with any comedic timing. It is repetitive, it is rhythmic, you know, the gestures have a rhythm and they repeat and they morph and they change. So I think there's something about, we settle into that and the audience settle into it. Maybe it's the balloon idea. We settle in and then go, this is Holding a Very Small Kitten. This is smoking fags behind the youth club in 1976. You know, whatever it is, I think yeah, I think it builds through repetition and rhythm.
Pete, improvisation, or what has been decided upon before?
I think there's an interesting thing about it, because I agree. I like Tom and I used in terms of comedians pretending to improvise. I mean, it's something that Tom and I, there used to be a double act called the Pajama Men, who were very big in Edinburgh, and their stock in trade was pretending to find each other funny. Like they would, you know, break out of this act because the other one was and I'm sitting there going, you know, they do this every night, people are lapping it up. They did it well, but it wasn't real. Okay, so there's that's an interesting world of thing, because they understood that people really like it when things break down. When the thing falls apart, it's a very enjoyable, and obviously this famous shows about the show going, the theatre, whatever it's called, that goes wrong or whatever, and it's a big show all around the world. And that's all based on that. People like it when things break, or because it brings you to the present moment. It's about time, because it brings you out of whatever the thing is that's being created into the real presence of the current events, the flow of events now. So I think there's that. I think there's also this is one of the things that for me around sort of comic timing. In improvisation, you are super present. So your comic timing is likely to be excellent. Like if you know, and it's when you are a person who likes to be funny, like for me, I've like tried to sort of stop this as a habit, because it's such a social habit of mine. I'm listening to people only to find a moment for me to say something funny in response to what they're saying. I'm literally like focused in on them, really listening, waiting for the moment, waiting for the thing to arise that means that I can say something really funny. Like it's just a bad habit, like a bad social habit, but it's very useful as a person making funny things, because I'm just in the world of the thing, like trying to manipulate it so that a funny thing can come out of it. And that is about timing, because it's about waiting. It's about not, it is only funny when it's funny. Like it's funny when the moment for it to be funny happens. Like there's a moment for it to come. So I think there's that in improvisation. So in a way, the time is like, what is comic timing? Interesting, because for me it's really like a contextual judgment. It in one sense, and even when something is set, even when there is something is set, there's still a way of doing it that is funnier and a way of doing it that is less funny. So there is I think there's definitely a truth to, there is timing which is funnier, and there's probably rules and laws about that, but I don't know what they are. Yeah, I was going to say something else about improvising. Oh yeah, the other thing that I think what I noticed that comedians are really good at, because a lot of comedians who like work with the audience a little bit, and then they start doing their thing, and then they're in a world of, I'm going to remember some of the things that the audience have said. I've had a chat with the audience at the beginning. Now I'm going to start my routine. Now I'm going to go back to that person who said that thing. And that's going to be funny, because now I've got to this point and it's reminded me of that person. So I'm going to say it, and the audience are going to see the connection between those things, and it's going to be funny. Comedians, I think, are really good at that. And I notice it on like some radio panel shows and things like that. Some people are so excellent at that, and that what they do is provide structure to the thing by doing it. They create structure in the thing that you're watching or listening to, because they're able to pick up things from earlier and bring them back around and let them arrive in the present with what's happening in this present flow of whatever it is.
Tom, improvisation, knowing what you're going to do, making decisions before. What are your thoughts?
I suppose I'm thinking about going on to do a show that I've done 60 times. The challenge of having to do that again and go on tonight, even though I did it every night for the last 26 nights, and how I need to bring my experience as an improviser into that world where I'm delivering something. The challenge is about trying to find it fresh in that moment. And yeah, I definitely bring the improviser me into that world, and I'm trying to be present, as Pete will, as we're all trying to do, and being aware that the audience are hearing it for the first time, and trying to make it that I'm playing it for the first time, and trying to be there, and that the timing, maybe the material is all set, but the timing isn't. Maybe I'm playing, maybe the show is an instrument and I'm playing that instrument on stage, or we're playing that instrument on stage, something like that. That actually, that's the game. The timing is the game. Yeah, you could say that the rhythm is the game, or the energy is the game, or something like that. I don't quite know what it is. Trying to access my playful mind rather than my kind of recalling, delivering mind. trying to access the play for me in that space. That's where it gets satisfying. And then, of course, being alive to what is happening in the room and being alive to what the audience are doing is kind of the most important thing in that. And we slightly differ. I quite like having the lights up so I can see the whites of their eyes. Pete likes having the lights down because he can't see the whites of their eyes because he's a bit blind. And I just like to actually physically play with the audience, and that becomes a dance and an improvisation in that moment, I think. Yeah, can I say something else that's just cropped up that I've just been thinking about quite a bit, and I don't want it to run out of time before this goes. But in our double act, we play slightly different characters, and we've never really massively pinned them down. People have tried to encourage us to pin them down over the years, but we've never really done it. So there's not this straight one and funny one, and there's not the daft one and the clever one, although some people might disagree. There's Pete's comedy heroes are Cannon and Ball, which is going to be a reference that gets lost to some people, but it's a comedy double act from the 70s. One of the things that we have done, and I think it's kind of traditional, it is a traditional trope of double acts, is that my character is aware of time. My character knows that the audience have only got, the show has only got 55 minutes, so we've got to crack on. So he knows. And Pete's character is free of time and doesn't care, which is, yeah. So it feels like that's relevant. So I'm always going, so when he's upstaging me, it's the time that he's taking up that is my problem, because for some reason my character wants to get to the end and is aware that we've only got so much.
That's so interesting to hear your partnership relationship framed in that way, Tom, because, sorry, Jonathan, I'm jumping in, because you have very different personalities on stage, and Tom, over time I've seen you as the kind of straight man to Pete's humor. Not that you're not funny, believe me, but you know there's that kind of tension between you. But to hear it framed in that way of acknowledgement of time puts a really different light on that partnership. That's really interesting. I can, reflecting on your work, I can see that, I can feel that in it with that focus. And
that's not something that's contrived, that's real.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? That's like based on our real relationship.
Yeah.
We didn't decide that. I do know when the rehearsal is going to finish, and I do know largely what time we're on stage.
And Pete ain't got a clue.
Not only has he not got a clue, he doesn't care. Hence the exasperation in my character. So
by the time you get on stage, you're like,
yeah, I'm already there.
Yeah.
And I really recognise that, because Matteo is hiding downstairs, waiting for me to finish so that we can rehearse something for a performance next week in Vienna. He could have been watching and learning, but he chose not to. But I'm aware that I think I burden him with the responsibility of looking after the time in our performances, and he takes that role on because he's the composer. He comes from music. He's supposed to care about time. And that I suddenly, it's extremely interesting what you just said, Tom, but I suddenly thought, oh yeah, that allows me to take a liberty, to constantly take a liberty. But then I'm thinking, I suddenly had an image of maybe choreography or dramaturgy. Maybe its most basic form is just somebody on stage is taking responsibility for the time. That's all it needs, and it doesn't matter how they do it. As long as somebody is taking responsibility, then there is a dramaturgy and there is a choreography. and we maybe don't need to be any more complicated about it than that. But somehow, if I'm in the audience, I think I need to know that somebody's looking after me, because I've come here and I will be easily bored. I mean, I have a very high boredom threshold, but I might cross it, or I might be thinking about beer or something. So I just need some kind of reassurance. And I'm suddenly, I also think sometimes it shifts between people in a performance. If I think of forced entertainment theatre company, I think they're quite good at passing the buck. That's one of their ensemble skills. I don't know if they work on that. I imagine it's just years of being together in the same performance space. We've been chatting for an hour. Is there any of the people listening? Is there anything you would like to throw in to this conversation as an observation, as a question, as a critique? Maybe we said something you disagree with, or that you have a completely different experience of. I mean, you can either drop it in the chat or just, I don't know, how do you, you just unmute and speak? I think it works as simply as that, doesn't it? Yeah. Just like a business meeting, but differently titled. Anybody have any thoughts? Questions?
I have a question, but I'm really happy just to not ask that right now, just to allow other people in the room to
go
ask
ahead
something.
and go ahead.
Shall
and we can pick things up as
okay. I suppose a common denominator in Tom's work, Pete's work, and my work is that we use speech in it, and so contemporary dance, we know is a really broad church, and it includes all sorts of things. But I'm just wondering how much speech and vocal delivery or vocal commentary actually supports the comedic timing, and if it was a purely movement-based piece, could it be as funny? So I'm just, I'm Pete. Hooray.
The first show that Tom and I made had a letter that someone had sent to us that we read out because neither of us felt particularly confident about remembering any of the words. That was the only words in the show. Obviously, that had a contextualizing impact. It wasn't a nothing. But there were lots of funny things in that show, and our aim in that show was solely to make a funny dance piece. That was all. We just went, do you think we could make a funny dance piece? And then we tried to answer that question. And definitely some of it was funny. It had some funny ideas and it had some funny moments in it. I think it's the same things apply. I don't think it's to do with, for me, I don't think it's to do with words or not words. Words are very powerful in the way that I think Jonathan said very earlier about how you can imprint movement with anything. And Tom and I use that for sure, because one of our early concerns was that we didn't want to make dance theatre where the movement had to mean anything. Like there was this whole thing where Lloyd Newson said, make stuff about something or something like that. And I was like, well, I like things. I like Trisha Brown as well. Why do we have to do that, Lloyd? Can we have both? And I also noted that I didn't like movement that was narrative, that was like trying to tell me a story. I was like very off put by it. I'm not saying it's bad. For me personally, I was off put by it. So I think one of our early things was making things that are just themselves. And in a sense, then the other things around them provide them with context. The other things that we do and the other things that we say do that. But I think so therefore those things are all impacting on each other and making them either funny or sad or whatever it is. They're all sort of interrelated in that way in terms of how meaning is generated for people, along with what people's experiences that they're bringing to those things, and connections that they're making in the way that you were talking about with memory, Sal. But yeah, I think you can just as easily build a tension and with something without words. Is an example of it is I get my hand stuck on a table. And this is how stupid the first show was that we made. I put my hand on a table, my hand gets stuck on the table. There is an implied thing that I have to do a unison dance with Tom. I now have to do that unison dance carrying the table around the stage with me because my hand is stuck on it. It's a very stupid setup, but it still, it still does that thing, which is it builds the tension that allows that brings us to the comedy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just remembering that Matteo and I just revived the only one of only two pieces where we don't use words. A piece called The Quiet Dance, and we stopped doing it because we were too elderly, and now we've remade it for the elderly. The only there's lots of overtly funny things in it, but part of our problem with the piece was that we had memorized it and it was incredibly difficult to remember what we were doing. So I made a score that would fit in our pockets. And so every now and again, after 3 or 4 minutes, we stand still, take the score out, read what's next, and then put it away again. And somebody reviewed it in Norway a few weeks ago and assumed that she said something like, well, they did it once and it was quite funny, but I couldn't believe that they kept on doing this joke all the way through the performance. And she said, and they were pretending they couldn't read, they were pretending they couldn't read their books. And it was like, it was quite frustrating actually, because it was the only non-thing that wasn't meant to be funny. And we actually really needed to read the books, and we genuinely couldn't see them because we're long-sighted and the theatre light was interrupting. Anyway, I digress. Tom, did you have a response to what Sally was sharing there about the words or physical comedy?
Not really. No. I'm doing that street. I'm doing some street. I directed a street show last year. That was a clowning thing. So I've been doing stuff without words. I kind of just. I suppose the thing I'd say is that I'm really, because I'm a sort of office-based artist these days because of financial constraints. I don't get in a studio with dancers very often, and I just find that because I want to be an artist every day, that I find myself writing words. And less inclined at my age to find myself making dances. Although I did make one earlier with some cornflakes, which I was quite pleased with. But it's a rare thing for me to make a dance these days because sort of just the practicalities of getting old and having a computer, I suppose. That's it.
Yeah. Any thoughts, questions from anybody else? A little pause there. Ramsey, do you want to unmute yourself and come on, or do you want to put it in the chat? Oh, you're muted still, Ramsey. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My idea about what I initially thought when you were talking about comic timing is about knowing exactly the right moment, or feeling where the right moment is, or feeling how long to wait until you deliver something. So could you say something about that experience of sensing time passing, whether it slows down for you or whether it's yes, how you experience that?
Yes. Shall I say something about that? Again, I'm going to refer to This Is with Pete. And what am I going to say about that? I think there is this sense that things are emerging and being revealed, obviously by us. We are in control of that to a certain extent. And there is no set rhythm. There is no set, every minute we need to say something which is going to make the audience laugh. Sometimes we go for quite prolonged periods with just gesture and no verbal contribution to that. Or other times we are doing a kind of quick fire. This is Box of Buttons. This is my grandmother's attic. This is snow in Japan in 1942. This is, whatever it is. So we have a kind of range of tempos and modes of delivery that we can work with. And I think for me, working with Pete, I feel like we work really well together, Pete, and I feel like we respond to each other really well and really clearly in that moment. And so a lot of it, Ramsey, I think, is us responding to each other and knowing when it's time just to pause the verbal for a moment, or to come in with a Box of Buttons, grandmother's attic, snow in Japan, boom, and then the balloon is popped. So I think a lot of it is about intuition and about feeling. Feeling, it's such a kind of woolly word, isn't it? But there is something about feeling that moment and feeling when it needs to be released, feeling when you can just keep building it. So I would say it's a kind of embodied, intuitive sense. There's a cat, which might be different if it was Tom and I doing it, or if it was Kerry and I doing it. But so I think Pete and I have a particular timing and rhythmic relationship and funny relationship. We have a funny relationship, Pete. But in terms of that kind of comedic timing, I think we work really well together with that, and so we play off each other. But I think for me, it's intuitive. It's not a conscious, oh, I've done it 3 times, therefore now the balloon gets popped. Sometimes it's not resolved at all.
I mean, just to add to that, but going back to what you were talking about before, Sal, and your own practice being so much about noticing, I think that is, that's the, in one sense, certainly in an improvisational sense, but also in a, with material that's set, there is just a noticing of how it is in this particular presence, in this flow of presence that we're in. It is different from yesterday. Not even it is different from yesterday. It is how it is today. And so there is a sort of the sense that it's intuitive is that it is that you are noticing in a pre-reflective way without having to gather everything that you're noticing. You are noticing all of that. You are noticing all of it. And it's undeniable. And so then your gesture or verbal gesture or word or whatever it is, you are landing it in that context. So as long as you are doing that, you are doing it. It's only when you're not doing it that it falls apart. You know what I mean? So if it feels forced or wrong or out of time or not funny, it's because you've disengaged from the context. That's what I think.
Yeah.
There is another thing I heard that I would just want to say about it, which I think was a really good story. I can't remember the actor, but I heard an actor talking about being in a play with Tom Stoppard, a Tom Stoppard play. and Tom Stoppard came up to him after a rehearsal and said, "Oh, that was really good. You do know that after whatever the word was, there's a comma." And the actor said, yeah, I know. I said, "Well, you know, do the comma then." And then that night he did the comma and it got a laugh, and it hadn't got a laugh before. So there is knowledge, you know, there is understanding and knowledge, but that's in a sense, like, that is because Tom Stoppard has engaged with this piece of writing in a way that he so as he's written that piece of writing, he understands that there needs to be space there for the audience. So and so even though you say, "Oh, that's in the writing," it's still intuitive. It's just intuitive for Tom Stoppard. He's decided intuitively there's a space there, so he's put a comma, comma. And so yeah, so I think it's something, it's to do with noticing and being sort of engaged in the context that you're in.
Tom?
I suppose I'm thinking about how much I craft time for the person who I'm on stage with. I make space and time for them, and how we're kind of working that together. But there's the idea of setting up and then holding that space that then Pete can come into. I'm really aware of that all the time. So that's the timing that I'm most thinking about when I'm on stage is the space between us. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's really relevant. That's what came to my mind.
When Ramsey, you asked that question, I found myself thinking, oh, I really don't have any feeling for time. When I'm performing, I can't feel time. I'm too nervous. I'm too adrenalized. The idea that I could be sensitized to time didn't make any sense. But as soon as you spoke, Sally, and you've echoed it just then, Tom, suddenly occurred to me that the time is the time only exists in relation to other people, including the audience and the context. That the time is constructed by the interaction between people, and it's not there otherwise. So I can't be sensitive to time. I can only be sensitive to the time that I'm sharing with you, which is not an image I've had before, but it does answer a certain question for myself, because I sometimes feel like I ought to be more sensitive. I ought by now to have a feeling for time, but I find as soon as I think I've got a feeling for time, it all goes wrong. Which is what you're saying, Pete, that then I've gone outside what's happening.
Yeah.
And I do that quite a lot, and I dislike myself for doing that. It's any other thoughts from anybody else? Questions, observations, critiques? Esme.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's like a fully formed question. It's just kind of some thoughts and ramblings. But I guess in general, I'm curious about the role of vulnerability, and if there is one for any of you in relation to this, and just thinking about, I guess, something that you mentioned, Tom, briefly around the relationship that you might have outside with Peter, and the relationship that might be happening, the dynamic that might be happening on stage. My voice disappearing. And I guess when something's not scripted and improvised, this kind of relationship with risk and possibility for exposure, maybe. Yeah, I think it's something that keeps coming to me as you're talking. So yeah, they're my ramblings, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Great question.
Go on, Sally, you go.
No, I went first last time. You go, Pete.
I mean, I would say around vulnerability is that it is that if you, as Tom talks about in terms of you know, leaving the space for the other person, making space for the other person. It is essentially vulnerable. You are essentially vulnerable because you're not trying to master it. So I think there's this thing about, I was discussing this with a MA student the other day about, you can master a skill, okay, but you cannot master art. Art is essentially sort of about the future. It's about it's about the not knowing. So for me, there's something about, you are essentially vulnerable because you are opening yourself up to the direction that someone else takes you, and you are allowing that. You are open to that. You are saying yes to, you know, one of the things in Sal and I's show is that we often we have a little thing that we're both looking for, and only one of us can get there. And that is to put the other person on the spot to make them do a dance based on something that's come up in the show. And it is on purpose, cruelly making the other person vulnerable. And it's very funny. It's always funny because you're really like going, oh, why don't you do a dance about that, Sal? Or Sal's doing that to me. And then I have to go, okay, now I've got to do a solo on this thing that you've proposed. And then you have to deal with it. And it's fun. But if you wanted to be in control, if you wanted to master it, if you wanted to hold everything and not allow for it to be filled with vulnerability and potential failure, then you would not be able to do it.
Yeah, I was going to use that solo moment as an example of that, Pete. So great that you brought that in. I was just thinking that vulnerability generally has a sort of negative quality to it. And I think there's something in improvisational practices whereby, I'm not sure whether I'd call it a vulnerability, but there's an openness, there's an awareness, there's a responsiveness, there's a noticing of what is going on that kind of keeps you on your toes. Hence the, you know, the kind of thrust of improvisation, I guess. You're never quite sure what's going to come next. And so there is a degree of vulnerability in improvisation, but I think in a really positive way that kind of helps bring you to the practice and bring you to the not knowing. And for me, that's a really beautiful part of improvisation, the not knowing quite what's going to happen, what Pete's going to say next. What am I going to say next? So I think I kind of try to embrace that vulnerability rather than shy away from it.
The funniest performance I ever saw was, bizarrely enough, a Deborah Hay performance called The Match, with 4 incredible improvisers: Wally Cordona, Ros Warby, Chrissa Parkinson, and Mark Lorimer. And there was one section where a different person each night had to do a solo, and the solo worked like this: they had to make a noise and then respond to it physically, and the other performers were not allowed to interrupt it until it was exhausted. And I saw the performance a few times, but one night when I saw it, Mark Lorimer, he began with a movement and a noise that went like this: rip, 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 rip. And so he kept that going for a while. And then, by an amazing coincidence of the universe, his trousers split. Right from waistband to waistband underneath, as he split his legs, as he said, rip, 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 rip. And then the others were not allowed to rescue him. And there were people who were, I think, close to cardiac arrest in the audience, because his vulnerability was just off the scale. Yeah, it was quite extraordinary, and he handled it extremely well. Anyway, Tom, did you have any thoughts about vulnerability before we stop?
I think I just cart my vulnerability with me on stage every night.
Mm.
I don't want to. I do. I wish I could be somebody else who carted their kind of expertise on stage every night, but yeah, it's reluctantly. And the great thing about being a double act is the other one sort of shields you. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, Matteo and I have a principle that is supposed to rescue you from the cartload of vulnerability you're dragging behind you, like the matted tail of a sheep, which is that at any given moment, I must imagine that I'm just the piano player and he's the singer. And so nobody is really paying any attention to me, and simultaneously he can do the same. And it's become really a habit of performing. But what I like about you saying that, Tom, is that I do hear a lot of a kind of dogma around the idea of the beautiful nature of vulnerability in performance, and it's actually quite painful sometimes. Do you know what I mean? So thank you. That you've relieved me. I think we should wrap up there. Thank you, Tom and Sally and Pete. So many. I actually, this was the first time that I really started taking notes, but because I have to go on making a living stealing your ideas in other contexts. So, but I will credit you fully. I promise. I just won't pay you. And thank you, Kerry, for curating and hosting this with me, and thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Pete and Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks,
Lovely.
everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.